There was a tradition in our family that when someone got married, the bride would spend the first night in grandfather's room. The strange thing was that within a month she would be pregnant. When I got married, I refused to follow this tradition and did not send my bride to grandfather's room. However, even after 2 years of marriage, we didn't have a child. Reluctantly, one day, I sent my wife to grandfather's room and secretly watched to see what happened. What I witnessed made my hair stand on end. Elders are crucial in any family, but when they stray down the wrong path, what happens to that family? My grandfather was a role model for me, and learning the truth about him left me in shock. Our family was known for respecting others, and I had never imagined that such behavior could happen with the women in our household. I believed I could prevent this from continuing, but I, too, became complicit. We were an educated, respectable family, living together in a joint household where we rarely fought about anything. My grandfather was the head of the family. Everyone respected and obeyed him, and he treated everyone lovingly, never scolding anyone. However, our family had a bizarre tradition that often made people refuse to give their daughters in marriage to us, and our elders had started working to end it. Since childhood, I had seen every bride in our home spend her first night in grandfather's room. As a child, I didn't understand this, but as I grew up, this strange custom filled my mind with questions. I tried to uncover the truth, but no one in the family was willing to talk about it, even though this had been going on for years. The surprising part was that every bride who spent a night in grandfather's room became pregnant within a month, but I found it absurd and disagreed with it. Among all my brothers, I was the third eldest. My elder brothers' wives also followed this ritual, but never said a word about it. I had many arguments with them, but no one gave me an answer, and I needed one, as my marriage was being arranged. I knew that the same tradition awaited me, and I was determined to avoid it. On my wedding day, I told my brothers that I would not leave my wife in grandfather's room and took her to my own room. I expected grandfather to react, but he said nothing, and his behavior remained normal. 2 years passed, and we were still childless. We went to the doctor, and all our tests were normal, but nothing worked. My brothers often told me I was wrong and would never have children, which made me furious. How could I be wrong for refusing to send my wife to another man's room, even if that man was my grandfather? My wife, too, found the tradition strange and disliked it. However, as time passed, the pressure from people around us began to depress us. Everyone else in the family had children, and we felt isolated. My wife started to lose herself and became irritable. One day, she suggested herself that I should send her to grandfather's room. Hearing this, I got angry, refusing to do it, but she insisted, saying we couldn't remain childless forever, and I scolded her into silence, insisting that God would grant us a child if it was meant to be. As time passed, her anxiety grew, and even I began to feel broken. Finally, after seeing everyone else send their wives to grandfather's room, I wondered if it might work for me too. With a heavy heart, I told grandfather that I would leave my wife in his room that night. He agreed, and that night, as planned, I hid in the room to observe. But suddenly, a friend of mine got into an accident, and I had to rush to the hospital. As promised, my wife went to grandfather's room that night. The next morning, when I returned home, I asked my wife what happened. She said she didn't remember much. She recalled grandfather placing his hand on her head. Then a strange fragrance filled the air, and she fainted. When she woke up, she found herself on the bed, and grandfather was sitting on the sofa, reading the newspaper. Her words left me feeling uneasy. Why had grandfather needed to make her unconscious when I had willingly sent her? Despite my doubts, I noticed that my wife seemed happier, and a month later, she was pregnant. Though I was thrilled, a nagging suspicion remained in my heart. Was the child truly mine? My wife was overjoyed, and seeing her happiness, I kept my worries to myself, not wanting to ruin her joy. I decided to get a DNA test once the baby was born to confirm. This time of waiting was difficult. Whenever I felt happy about our baby, I'd recall that one night which clouded my joy. When our son was born, he was beautiful, and our happiness knew no bounds. The whole family was delighted, especially grandfather, who loved me the most among all his grandchildren. Still, the suspicion persisted. A few days later, I secretly took my son for a DNA test. 3 days felt like an eternity. On the day the results were due, I was so anxious that I had to be admitted to the emergency room. I collected the report, but couldn't bring myself to open. I felt frustrated, wondering why I hadn't just accepted things as they were, like everyone else. After hours of internal struggle, I left the report on my office table, planning to look at it the next day. However, I got so busy with work that I forgot about it. When I finally remembered, I couldn't find the report anywhere, as if fate itself had intervened. Realizing that perhaps I wasn't meant to know, I decided to accept my child wholeheartedly. 2 more years passed, and my wife became pregnant again, this time without visiting grandfather's room, yet the old doubts resurfaced. This time, I took my son again for an emergency DNA test, and the results were clear. The child was indeed mine. This revelation left me stunned. Why did we only conceive after that night in grandfather's room? Relieved, I turned my attention to what was happening around me. All my brothers had multiple children, but their wives only spent 1 night in that room. Something was clearly unusual. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate. My youngest brother was now old enough to marry, and I wanted to protect his bride from the tradition. On his wedding day, I made an excuse to leave, but secretly returned and hid in grandfather's room. That night, grandfather entered alone, waiting for the bride. I watched in silence as he spoke gently to her, reassuring her. Then, he took out a handkerchief and made her unconscious. He laid her on the bed, covered her with a blanket, and spent the night watching over her. What was happening? Months later, grandfather fell ill. Before passing away, he asked to speak to whoever knew his secret. I confessed everything, and he explained that our family was cursed generations ago by a powerful sorcerer. A sage had found a ritual to break this curse, but it required each new bride to spend a night with the eldest male of the family. Grandfather had never touched any of the women, but performed rituals to protect our bloodline. His methods ensured that our family could continue having children. Grandfather made me promise to share this truth after his death, and so I did. Our family's doubts vanished, and the herbal items he had used were thrown into a flowing river, freeing us from the curse at last. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any updates.